Hi there and welcome to another update on the progress of our game prototype, Rogue Wave. It's an open source first-person roguelite wave shooter. This update is a big one. In this video we're going to take a very brief look at a bunch of work that's focused on player onboarding and player agency. This includes work on procedural level generation, the introduction of destructible environments, improvements to the management of weapons, and the introduction of true character progression through the upgrade system. We've also added our first passive weapon, which is essentially an auto shooter for the more casual player. There's also important additions to the enemy AI, bringing new challenges to the player. While the game's still a prototype, we have introduced some new placeholder art to test out a possible direction for the art style. Let us know what you think of it in the comments. And there's even some documentation so you can create your own game using this open source code. Links in the description. So that's a lot to get through. Let's get on with it. The level generator received another big upgrade in this cycle. The wave function collapse algorithm's been significantly enhanced, and we've added more procedural mesh generation. So now you can have a more structured level with paths between different areas and tiles. In addition, it's now possible to constrain tiles to specific areas of the map, or even a single location. Using this feature, we can create zones in the level that will contain different types of tiles. You can see a little of this in later levels where we've added areas with tall buildings and low buildings, for example. Ultimately, this means we now have the ability to partially control the procedural generation. This is really important for consistently solid gameplay, since entirely procedural levels can become horribly repetitive. This current release doesn't leverage these new features to the fullest extent, but there are some hints of it in here. While we're still to do any detailed level design, we have put this new flexibility to good use. We now have double the number of levels, and this has allowed us to gradually introduce the enemies, allowing the player to incrementally learn strategies for dealing with them, rather than encountering them all at the same time and simply drowning. Later levels still get as complex as the earlier test levels, but now new players have a chance of surviving a level or two on their very first game. Check this out.
Building 12 gauge ammo. Completed.
This is an early version of a destructive environment that we have set up. Game feel is really critical to any game. Some time ago I made some experiments with destructive buildings like this. I've improved it quite a bit here, although there's still work to be done. There's still a bit of a frame rate issue going on, but it's so much fun. I'm going to have to keep working on this. In fact, it's so much fun we've decided to make the entire environment destructible. This will open up some interesting possibilities in level design. Imagine, for example, an area of the map that's completely closed off until you destroy some of the environment. Looking forward to playing with this stuff. In fact, this has already been used in some of the levels. In playtesting, we found that it was difficult to get enough resources in the middle levels. This was solved by adding destructible furniture to the map that will drop resources when destroyed. The player can now back off from the fight to collect resources, but staying out the battle for too long will result in the AI seeking them out. In an earlier iteration of the game, we changed the weapon pickups so that when pressing a key they were collected instantly, rather than after a delay. However, this was still slowing down the game. This is an arcade-style shooter, so anything that slows things down is potentially drawing away from the player's enjoyment. So what we've done in this version is we've made the weapons contact pickups just like all the other items. This is a really good example of how a game designer can never really know the right way of doing something until players have tested it. This is the third implementation of the weapon pickup system already. Let's see if this one works out. While implementing this, we also added the ability to create variations on weapon pickups. A game like Rogue Wave needs an ever-evolving weapons arsenal. Creating new weapons adds interest, but so do upgrades to existing weapons. One of the cool things about Neo FPS is that the weapon system is highly modular. This release sees the first use of this system with the addition of damage upgrades for all ammo types. Another exciting development related to weapons is our first passive weapon. This is a special kind of weapon that doesn't require the player to do anything in order to use it. In terms of game lore, what happens is the nanobots spread out from the player and cause havoc.
Recipe requested.
While we've not figured out a good way to show this visually yet, currently we're using this rather ugly expanding sphere, we have found that it allows players to adopt a different strategy in combat. That's exactly what we were aiming for, player agency. Still on the topic of weapons, we've improved the player's control over what weapons are built in-game. The player can now set the build order of weapons, and they can even exclude certain weapons from specific runs. For example, the grenade launcher isn't very effective against the early level enemies, but in the later levels, when our new enemy, the Taurus engine, emerges, it becomes critical. Rather than take around 20 shots with an assault rifle, you can use just one well-placed grenade. With this new system, you can prevent the grenade launcher from being built in levels that don't have these highly armoured enemies, but include them when they're needed. In the first implementation of the in-game reward system, we had a chest that would appear. The player would open it and select one of 3 recipes. However, this meant that the game flow was interrupted. So we switched to a system in which the nanobots would offer a recipe, and if it wasn't accepted, they would then offer another one shortly afterwards. This would continue until the player accepted an offer. So no break in play, but in playtesting, we found that players didn't realise that they could wait for an updated offer, and thus we got feedback that players didn't feel as though they could build a strategy. Since player agency is a focus of this release, we decided to tackle this problem. What we've done is we've returned to offering 3 recipes as per the first implementation, but we now do this within the game flow as per the second approach. This means players get to choose their preferred offer, but they don't have to stop to open a chest and make their choice. We think this version's the best so far, but give it a go and let us know what you think. While we're confident that this will have improved things, we were also concerned that the selection of recipes offered were entirely random, so we tackled this too. Each upgrade now has a minimum nanobot level that must be attained before it will be offered, thus ensuring that we can build a power progression into the upgrades offered. We've also added the ability to create dependencies that must be satisfied before that recipe is available. For example, a weapon upgrade will only be offered if the player already has the related weapon. With the addition of an algorithm for calculating the relative likelihood of any particular upgrade being offered, we can now create more and less common upgrades. Finally, we've added a system of complementary upgrades. When the player already owns a recipe that is complementing other recipes, the chance of those other recipes being offered is increased. All these things should come together to give the player a decent amount of control over their upgrade selection. There's still plenty of randomness in there, because that's an essential factor of a roguelite, but the player can influence that randomness with careful selection of upgrades. As with most of these systems we're building in, we think this is a good approach, but only playtesting and player feedback can help us really nail this. We're looking forward to hearing from you. Having spent time giving the players agency over how they fight the enemies, it became important to make the enemies harder to fight. This time around, the focus was on the AI. They now form squads and move in unison using a fairly simple flocking algorithm. They will now vary their direction of approach and speed to match the intentions of the rest of the squad. The project's getting pretty complex now. It's becoming harder and harder to remember all of the details. So it's becoming pretty important that we document it. While we know that documentation is never complete, we do recognise that having something is better than nothing. So here it is, in the wiki on GitHub. Wow, that's a ton of work. All this code is open source. You can download it and play with it. Even contribute to it if you feel the urge. Links in the description.